Welcome to How to Write Good. My name is Daniel Poppy. You can find out more about me at danielpoppy.com. Poppy is spelled P-O-P-P-I-E. Daniel is spelled some way that has been lost to history. You'll actually have to get an archaeology PhD to figure out how to spell it. So good luck. Good luck finding everything. It's a little earlier for recording this for me, so I haven't really fully woken up, but that's all right. I think it'll be okay. I always say this and I end up being incorrect, but I always say, oh, this is going to be a short podcast, and it ends up being 10, 20 minutes longer. So maybe this will be a short podcast because this is an idea. I thought about this idea. I thought about what I'm talking about today, and I couldn't really get to the ground of it. So you're going to be following along with my thoughts, and maybe you'll find that interesting, and maybe you'll be like, hey, it takes too long to get where you're going. It might take too long to get where I'm going. But besides that, like I said, it's a little early. It's all right. It's all right, though. So our word of the week, because we do that thing, is genuflex. So I lied last week, and I said I was going to have overlays to the video, because I do have a video now if you're listening. For those of you who are looking at the video and you're like, hey, I don't see anything on the video, I'm going to actually have stuff pop up on the video because I have that capability now. I have the technology, some would say. So I have the technology to put that up. So I'm going to actually put up a picture of this. Genuflect is bending a knee and bowing. This is actually typically associated with Catholicism. So Catholics, what they do is they will bend down on one knee and then they will cross themselves. I don't remember what crossing yourself actually, I thought there was a word for that, but they'll cross themselves and then they'll, you have your hands together and you're bending on one knee. It's a sign of respect. It's generally associated with the Catholic Church and Catholic Mass. People going up to the altar and then they bow onto one knee very quickly. We are going to jump into our accidental lessons. We're going to be talking about characters today, and I think this is a tough one. Maybe somebody has a better handle on characters, but how I'm going to have to go about this, if my mouth will actually do what I want it to. I don't actually have the ability to speak. How I'm going to have to go about this is I'm going to have to skirt around this idea and try to get to the heart of it, because this is something that eludes me to a certain degree, and maybe some people are feeling the same thing, or maybe you're just awesome at characters, right? So the question I'm going to be taking on today is what makes good characters, or what's at the heart of good characters. And as I've been thinking about it this morning, I really don't think there's an answer. I don't think there is one answer to what is at the heart of good characters. I think I've come to the conclusion that I just spilled on myself. I think I've come to the conclusion that there's more than one way to go about characters, and it depends on the characters you're dealing with. So when I first look at characters, what I first start to think is, you want your characters to be nuanced. You want your characters to be somewhat mysterious. You want your characters to be relatable. At the very least, relatable, right? If not more so, if not with that nuance, if not with that mystery as well. But I don't know if that's the heart of it. And the funny thing about it is I've had classes on writing, I've had classes on creative writing, and I've dealt with higher level literature classes, and I've never had somebody outright say what they think. Oh, this is what makes a good character. This is the heart of what a good character is. And maybe it's the case that there isn't one thing that makes a character's good. Maybe it's the case that it is a mysterious thing. Maybe it's the case that it is something that eludes people, that people just can't figure out. Okay, I definitely think that if you understand people better, you're going to be able to write characters better across any genre. I think that I don't have a really high opinion of actors and actresses, and I use both the terms because there's a reason why we have an actor term and an actress. There's a movement in actors and actresses circles to be like, hey, let's just call them actors. But what I think that does, if we just call it female, if we call it there was female actors and male actors, what we do is we have a word, first of all, for female actors, and I think we say, oh, what women are doing isn't as good. So I'm actually all for using actors and actresses, but I don't have a really high opinion of actors and actresses. If you're into theater, if you're into acting, it's not, I will judge you based on who you are as an individual, but generally what I see across the board with actors and actresses is people who, they do have an artistic skill. There's some actors and actresses that I really think they are, what would I say? They're phenomenal. They're phenomenal at what they do. I think last week I mentioned Kevin Spacey. I think he does great work. I think Christian Bale does awesome work. Now, I don't really think Christian Bale has. It's a different. I'm not in his life. I don't know what he was going through. I know that on the set of the Batman series, on one of the films, he just flipped out at a crew member, and I don't know what he's going through. I don't know his life, but what it seems like to me is that actors and actresses, I have to add that in, they sometimes, in a lot of cases, they have a desire to be loved by people. And if you're a stable person and you're in acting, go for it. That's fine. But it just seems to be the case that the people I've run across, they aren't normal, but a lot of them do have the ability to take on a character. And I think there is I don't know if you'd call it intelligence, but there's a sense there that they understand what it is they empathize. And I think that's a really big part of becoming an actor. I think that's a big part of art in general, that you empathize with other people. And I think that these different things, I think it's good to have nuance in your character. I think that it's good to have a somewhat mysterious character, a character that's relatable. At the same time, you can have characters who are archetypes, or archetypes, however you want to say it. You can have characters who are archetypes who don't have a lot of depth to them, who are phenomenal characters. I'm more of a fan of putting more depth into those archetypes, but you can certainly have those archetypes and not really flesh them out. I think that's okay, and I think there's a place for them. And I think that if you listen to my podcast, you realize that there is, how I work is there's kind of a place for every type of artistic thing. It's creativity. Creativity has such large bounds. There are boundaries to creativity. There are boundaries to art. There's boundaries to writing fiction. I mean, if you don't actually write, like I said last week, if you are going to paint, you actually have to use paints. You can't go dance out in the street. But if you're going to write, you actually have to write. But the boundaries are huge, and you do have to follow certain narrative rules. But at the same time, if you know the narrative rules, you can actually hijack the narrative rules to not use the narrative rules. Does that make sense? So you know the narrative. If you know the narrative rules well enough, you can break them, but you're still using the narrative rules to break the narrative rules. I liken this to impressionist painting. So people like Monet are impressionist painters. If you see somebody and it looks blurry, if their paintings look blurry, they're impressionists. And what they've done is they've taken the form of the things in the world. If my chair's crackling, I'm sorry. I just can't. I like moving around, and my chair's wooden, so you'll just have to deal with it. But they'll take forms of things in the world, and they'll make them a little blurry, and that's the best way to describe it. But it's still beautiful. The what they're doing is they're eliciting a specific emotional reaction in the person who's viewing that painting. And when I view Impressionism, I am moved by it because it can. The amazing thing about Impressionism is that it can elicit emotions in a different way that realism can, because it does something. It does something with the paint. It does something with the colors. It does something with the form that you're looking at, how it all comes together, that realism can certainly do, but it's more difficult. And that actually is kind of connected to writing in general, or art in general. A lot of cases of art, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get to an experience. And I go back to that a lot. We're trying to get to an experience that someone else is going to have because of our art. I think that if you ask artists and they thought about it a while, if you ask anybody across the board who does creative work, I think that a lot of them are going to be like, yeah, I want a person to have a specific experience of this, because when they were creating this art, they themselves were having a specific experience. And I think it gets down to handmade items as well. There's a specific aesthetic experience. There's a specific qualitative experience you go through when you pick up a handmade item that you don't have when you pick up something that's mass produced. So for example, the cup is mass produced, so it's just a functional item. But when I have a few handmade items, and some of them are made by people I know, but I have a few handmade items, and when you pick up those, you appreciate the fact that it's handmade. There's a different, I can't even explain it, but that's what I think goes into art. So going back to what I was saying, this all goes back to an experience. This all goes back to actors and actresses. They sense something. They sense they have a great amount of empathy, and people, I think, who are in art in general have a greater amount of empathy. I actually think I don't want to get political in this, but I think that tends to be more present in people on the left side of the aisle. I think that actually there's studies that have shown that if you lean a little left, I think if you're on the extreme, if you're on the extreme, it doesn't apply. Let's just say that. But if you are someone who is kind of on the left a little bit, I think that people, I think it's been shown are a little bit more empathetic, and that's on personality tests. So there's a very good personality test called the Big Five, and on those tests it showed that if you were more left-leaning, I believe you were more empathetic, or whatever personality factor that was associated with empathy. But I think it's called empathy. But yeah, so these people are more empathetic. So actors and actresses, they have a sense. They have a sense of this. They can kind of relate to people, especially if they're very good. And I think there's a certain amount of intelligence that goes into that. But at the same time, there's only intelligence is only to a certain degree correlated with creativity. I know that creativity, it's a different thing. And there's connections, and maybe your intelligence will help you. But it doesn't. If you're not someone who's a super genius, you can still create things that are beautiful, and you can create things that are unique. It's divergent thinking, but they're empathetic, and I think that maybe that's at the core of creating really good characters that people love. Creating characters that really people are like, wow, I really like that character. But as I think about that breaks down to a certain degree. So I think that's a good place to start. Okay, that's a good place to start, and I think it's a good place when you're writing to be like, well, I want to actually understand this person before I write them. I think you can create really nuanced, really good characters if you actually don't stereotype a person. Okay, so I've got to stop right here because before I was talking about the fact that archetypes are okay. They are okay. They are not going to give you the most nuanced, amazing characters. You are going to have to adapt them and give them more nuance. You're going to have to build into that archetype to actually bring about more nuance. What I was saying before is there are times and places for these superficial characters. I think it's okay. Certain stories, certain types of certain media doesn't have the time to build a specific character. If you're writing a book, you have more time to build a character, but there are definitely going to be characters in there that are only mentioned for one or two lines that do become archetypes, that you build your whole entire character off of those two pieces of information or even one piece of information. If you call a character a clown, an actual clown, the reader's going to build their entire set of information about that character off of the fact that you called them a clown or that they are a clown. And then you can continue to just have them superficial. And I think that can be okay. You can continue to have these characters be superficial and they can serve a very good function. But I think that when we talk about characters who are... I almost dumped my coffee. But I think when we talk about characters who are really good characters that we love, I think those characters do have nuance. So start with the archetype if you need to, and then build in the nuance of that character. But I think that to build in that nuance, to actually have characters who are good, I think what we need to do is we need to actually empathize with different types of people. I've talked about this in the past with, it's dangerous for me to drink coffee while I'm podcasting, but I've talked about this in the past with connecting to people. I can't remember the exact topic, but the idea is that, oh yeah, I remember, it's writing from different people's perspectives. So I talked about this in the past with writing from different people's perspectives, and I think that one of the functions of art is to actually try to take people's different perspectives. So if you're an artist, if you're someone doing creative work where you're taking on characters, where you're presenting different types of people to people, I think it's part of your job, especially when you get into the main characters. It's part of your job to actually write in a way that doesn't straw man them. So what a straw man is in logic is that and I'm using this as a character reference, but when a straw man is the logical fallacy where you present an argument that isn't a very good argument. A good argument, an argument that has been thought out and been put together well, is what we call a robust argument. It's strong. It's a strong argument. It's the best that the defender of that specific argument is going to make. And what people tend to do, and this isn't a good thing at all. So if you see this, if you run into a really, really bad argument from someone who is an opponent of that specific argument, you might want to try to find a defender of that argument to see if that's the best that group can do. But what happens is people create these arguments against their opponents. They're like, oh, this is what this person thinks of this specific thing. This is their argument, and it's not actually their argument. It's a poor stand-in for their argument. And what the person does then is they say, oh, and this is why this argument's wrong. And that's called the straw man argument, where you set up a straw man, you knock it down. It's a logical fallacy, but you also can do it with people, where you set up a specific picture of a specific type of person, and then you say, well, this person's, I think we tend to do it in our culture, and we demonize people, where we set up a specific type of picture of a person in our society, and we knock it down. And I think that I kind of, what I always go back to with dealing with people, because I think that's where creating good characters comes down to, is understanding people, I guess. That's kind of where I'm running into. But what I go back to when I'm dealing with people is, you always try to humanize the person. You always try to realize that this person gets up in the morning and they have all their own struggles, and they have they're a human. They're an individual person. They think about stuff. They care about stuff. They love things. They hate things. They have their daily life. Their daily life is probably more similar to yours than it isn't. I don't think it's for everyone. I think there are certain things that you don't want if you have kids, you don't want your kids seeing. But I think the television show Dexter, even though it is taking on a very brutal premise, because if you don't know what the show is about, it's about a serial killer who works for, and this happens a lot in shows because that's just how it works. It's a serial killer who works for the cops. He works as a forensics blood analyst, if I can actually use words correctly. And it shows that he has these connections to different people. And some people might say, well, that's not a good representation of serial killers. But if you look at some people who end up being serial killers, they lead very normal, mundane lives. I know that there was a serial killer. I'm not going to name the serial killer directly, but the serial killer a few years back, like a decade back, he was an upstanding citizen. There's serial killers from the 70s or 80s who people really liked them. They were a part of their communities. They lived very mundane lives, and I think that even in those cases, these people who do horrific things, I think that there is a value in understanding them. Now, I think some people go too far. I think in certain cases, someone does a bad thing and people dismiss what they do that is bad. But I don't think there's any. I think it's good to be like, this is very bad and people should never do it. But I think that there's a very good case to be made that we want to see these people as human rather than as some monster. And I think it's that there's a tendency to think these people are so far removed from who we are, when in reality, how they live their lives are very similar. And that's an extreme case, okay? That's a very extreme case, and I think most people don't want to get into the heads of someone who is a killer, right? Especially a serial killer, because most people could probably understand a crime of passion where you just get full of rage and you kill someone, right? I think most people can be like, yeah, I understand that to a certain degree. But most people don't understand when you kill multiple people. So that's a very extreme example, and I got dark really quickly. But I think it applies across the board. So those are the people who are going to be the hardest to understand, I think. But at the same time, they have very similar lives to our own, and I think they go through very similar things within their lives. I think their lives are probably tinted toward brutality in a certain way, and maybe there's certain things they deal with. But if you look at the random person on the street that you see is not far removed from you at all. And even if you have an opposing ideology, that person probably is not far removed from you at all. One thing we do too, so there's specific people who are outliers in our society. There's specific people who are not like other people more than others. That's a really bizarre way to put it. There's people who are really far outliers, and I'm not just talking about serial killers. I'm also talking about people who are hyper intelligent, right? So there's people who are hyper intelligent. There's people who have specific mental disabilities, if you want to say that, or mental illnesses, right? And there's other forms of people. There's people who have amazing abilities who just outshine everybody else, right? There's people who are just so amazing at what they do, and it's this inborn thing, especially when you run into savants, where people who they can somehow do something that nobody else can do. I would liken this to, and I think I've mentioned him before. There's a guy, I think his name is Daniel Tammet. He wrote a book called Born on a Blue Day. He has autism, or if you want, whatever you want to call it. It would autism spectrum disorder. I don't know. Nowadays, it used to be autism, but I think it still is. But he's the guy who was able to memorize all these digits of pi, and the reason why he is because he could see numbers, and they each had a specific shape. Like each number, not the digits. So 214 had a specific shape, had a different color, had different textures associated with it, completely from 215. And he was able to, because of how our brains work, he was able to memorize things more quickly. But if you read his book, he was very similar in a lot of ways to a lot of people. And I think that when I read his book, I'm like, yeah, this guy, he's just a normal dude. You know, he had different things, but he was just a normal dude. But there's people who are outliers. That's what I'm saying. There's people who are outliers that we're like, yeah, but we're completely different than those people. What we also run into with other people is there's people who are in opposing ideological camps. And what I mean by that is there's people building their lives off of different ideas than ours. There's people who are in the world, probably in our own countries, who are building their lives off of completely different ideas than ours. And in some cases we demonize those people, or we think they're completely different than us, or we think that they're so stupid or different, whatever you want to say. But what I think is the case is that those people are very similar to us in the end, right? Those people are really, really similar to us. Those people are more similar to us than probably some people in our own ideological camps. But we think. So when you take on an idea, when you have a specific idea, that idea is going to result in specific things played out in your life. Like if you value compassion, you're probably going to see more compassion from yourself. If you don't value compassion, you're probably not going to see compassion played out in your life. But there are other things too. If you value fairness over justice, you're going to have more. You're going to have a different result, right? Because despite the fact that it seems like these things don't matter, they actually do. There's certain things in our lives. There's certain ideas that are there's certain assumptions. There's certain ideas that are at the bedrock of who we are. And if we base our ideas off of those things, we're going to arrive at different results. And the weird thing about that is that we often don't realize what those base assumptions are in our lives. So someone could have this base assumption that the world isn't fair, so they're never going to succeed, right? And that person isn't going to say, "Oh, my base assumption is that the world isn't fair." they're probably going to say the world isn't fair, I'm never going to get anywhere. Or they're just going to be like, it doesn't matter how hard I try. But their basic assumption, what they're going off of, is that they're never going to make it because the world isn't fair, because the deck is stacked against them. It's very good to have a truthful understanding of the world, and that's difficult to get at. So what basic assumptions are true is what we want to search for, but that's kind of a tangent. But the whole point of going through this, the whole point of talking about other ideological camps, other types of people who are outliers, is to just get back to that idea that they're people too, and you can understand them. And if you are a person who's creative, and if you want to make good creative work, especially when you're dealing with characters, what I think you need to do is I think that you need to have that empathy toward people you even hate. I think you need to develop a type of love toward those people. And I think that you're going to make better characters for those people. But I think that good characters do have nuance. I think that good characters can be somewhat mysterious, but I don't think it's necessarily the case. So this connects back to nuance. So I think good characters can be nuanced, and I think they're almost certainly nuanced. But the mystery that comes with the character is in the nuance of the character, rather than in the fact that they're just mysterious because. Some characters who are mysterious aren't interesting. Some characters who are mysterious are interesting. For example, characters who are mysterious and very interesting. It's harder to remember characters who are mysterious and uninteresting. But characters who are mysterious and very interesting are Darth Vader, because you don't know what's up with him. You have this very imposing figure. The Joker from the Christopher Nolan trilogy was a very interesting character because he was a very nuanced character in a lot of ways, but he was also mysterious. But he was mysterious. He wasn't just mysterious because, but the fact that he's mysterious, if we would have known why he was the way he was, would he have been as interesting? That's the question. And those characters, as they're presented on screen, aren't relatable, but they're great characters. But those do fall into the archetype character model. When we get down to actual characters who think, so if you're presenting a character's thoughts in your book, in your writing, and let's just get back to writing, I guess. If you're presenting a character's thoughts in your writing, that character's thoughts probably should be more nuanced and probably shouldn't be archetyped, okay? Because if you're presenting a character's thoughts, I've never met a person, despite intelligence level, despite situation, despite family structure, who isn't a complex person, who doesn't actually think about things to a certain degree, right? I've met people who have issues, who have mental delays, who react to things in specific ways, in specific complex ways. And you might want to, and for some cases it might be broken down to they were treated this way their whole entire lives, so they're reacting in this specific way. But it typically is the case that there's more thought behind it. There's a lot more emotion, there's a lot more thought, there's a lot more stuff going on inside their head. So I think that if you're presenting a character, if you're presenting the thoughts of a character, I think it's your duty, I don't know if I'd call it that, but it's your duty to actually bring nuance to that character. But I think the core of creating these good characters, the core of creating characters who are functioning as main characters, whether those main characters are functioning as main characters for a chapter or 17 books, I think the core of it is to know, and you have to first understand people, you have to be empathetic, but I think the core of getting to that good main character, I guess, is to actually know that main character, and that sounds really weird. But I think that you actually have to take time to first you have to kind of flesh out who the character is. And then you have to let that character sit in your mind for a while and see if that character works. You have to see if that character is not who they say they are, but see if that's the character you want. Because you are making the decisions, you are determining whether that character is who you want. In some cases, it happens naturally. In some cases, you write a character and you kind of know who they are, and you base who that character is off of that idea in your head, and it comes more naturally to you. In other cases, and this is where I think people write bad characters, is they have kind of a few ideas about the character, but they really don't know who the character is. They haven't developed the character in their mind. So they write the character, and then they're like, well, I'm writing, and they have the character do something that doesn't come across as correct for that character. The character's actions don't fit who the character is because the person who is writing the character doesn't actually know who the character is. It's kind of weird, right? I know writers who they've just written, I don't know if it's notebooks full, but they've written page upon page just trying to find out who the character is. And that's okay. If you need to do that, you need to do that. I always do prep work, and I think prep work is a very good thing to do. I always do prep work for all my writing, and I always try to figure out who the character is for all my writing before I even start writing, because what happens then if you figure out who the character is, and the character will develop as you go through the book, but you'll present the character as you believe the character to be to the reader. The reader will understand it better that way, and then you'll be able to make that character react as they're meant to be able to react. But again, if you want to write a character who's different than yourself, you can write yourself forever, right? And you're probably not going to write yourself accurately. You're always going to come out in your characters, I think, to a certain degree, because you're the writer, because you have a specific style, because you have specific thoughts, you have a specific viewpoint on the world. If somebody thinks that you write every character the same, just keep on working at it, keep on trying. But you're always going to be writing yourself into the characters. But if you're someone who is not capable of writing different types of characters, I would really start with understanding people. I'd really start with trying to get into the heads of other people. And it might be difficult for you, but I don't know. If you really try, if you take your time, I think that you can develop that habit of getting into the heads of other people, of understanding other people. Yeah, that's all I've got for you today. I hope this is useful. This is a difficult topic to take on, because I think characters are at the heart of why people love books. I think that people don't just watch movies. People don't just read books. People don't just read graphic novels for the plot. They read it for the characters, right? If you ask people about their favorite movies, if you ask people about their favorite books, it's probably a book or a movie series that really connects you to the characters in a way that's real, in a way that's not just one and done, right? And people get excited about their characters. You can see people getting excited about characters with superhero films. People like their specific superhero because those superheroes are people. Those superheroes generally have specific struggles. Those superheroes are presented in a specific way. And they're certainly more than just the character in a book. But as I said last week, plot-driven, character-focused. And I think that's good. So maybe take some time to just try to empathize with other people. Maybe that's a good place to start. And if you already do that, then maybe the next step is to actually build those characters in your mind, and then you can use that understanding of the character you've built to write. And one example I would give of this is if you know someone and you know them really well, you can kind of predict what they're going to do and how they're going to react and what they're going to say. And what I would suggest is that you try to write them. You try to put them in a scenario, and then you try to write them as accurately as possible. And again, I always go back to this idea that you don't necessarily have to have every little detail about a person or a place to get across the meaning. Just get the things that are important. Get the things that actually convey who this person is the best, because too much information is going to be an issue. But try writing people you know. And if you can write people you know accurately, then all you need to do is you need to create a character. You need to Congratulations, you got to the end of my podcast. So you either had to listen to my voice or you had to listen to my voice and watch my face, which I don't envy you. Let's just say that. But if you're someone who likes this podcast and you're thinking, you know, I'd like to support him in this podcast or the other creative things he's doing, creative things I'm doing, you know, there's a few things you can do, because some people don't know what they can do to support people who create stuff. So these are the few things you can do that will really, really help me. First of all, check out my website. Check out the other things I'm doing. Second, comment on things, share them, like them, subscribe. Subscribe if you haven't already. And the third thing you can do is give reviews on different places, all right? So the biggest thing for this podcast is going on to iTunes, giving it an honest review, telling people why you like it, telling people why you hate my voice, why you hate my face, but telling people why they should really check it out, despite the fact that I have so many failings in terms of looks and voice. Other than that, if you want to check out my books, grab a copy of the book and listen to the serialized novel. Give digital copies away. That's a really big thing too. I always want to give you something that is valuable to you. I always want to give someone listening to this podcast something that's going to stick with them, or a book that they can actually own. And you can own that book for very, very cheap. So go check that on Amazon. The different things I said: subscribe, upvote, comment, share, and definitely give it a review on iTunes. All right, as always, my name is Daniel Poppy, and this is How to Write Good.